Hi, welcome to this video series, part 1 on the Rob Bell controversy, as some are calling it, based on his book Love Wins. I prayed for quite a while on whether I should address the situation. My influence is not as large as some, so I was like, well, what can I really contribute to this discussion, this controversy? What is my part? And I was just meditating on it, and one night I had a dream. God speaks to me very clearly in dreams. And in the dream, my son's former youth pastor and his wife, Cody and Leah, were in this office. And the office walls were stark white, and behind Leah were several bookcases with different scholarly books. And she was sitting at the desk, and her hair was pulled out up in a tight bun, and she had glasses on, and she just looked like a professor. And then on the other side of her desk, Cody was standing there, and they were arguing. And he was dressed in his usual jeans and t-shirt, flip-flops, looked very non-professional, unscholarly. And she held up a notepad in her hand, and it was white, and on the bottom, as decoration, there were several books, they looked like encyclopedias. And then in his hand, he had the same white notebook, but along the bottom, there were different fruit displayed. And in the dream, I remember I was grieving. I was observing what was happening, but I had this overwhelming grief, and I felt that Cody was in danger. And to the left of Leah at her desk, standing on the end, so if she was facing this way with her big wooden desk, on this side was her son Caden, and he was watching the entire thing. And they were arguing over whether fruit or books was more important. And Cody kept telling her, it's the fruit, you have to have the fruit. And she's like, no, you have to have knowledge. And I understood in the dream that the argument that was occurring was over presence versus knowledge. And then the dream shifts scenes. That scene ends, and we're in a graveyard, and Caden is standing at a gravesite, and there's a tombstone, and I go up to the tombstone, and it has Cody Stovall written on it, and his date of birth, and then his date of death, and the dream ended. And I woke up, and I immediately thought, goodness, is this a literal dream? So I, prayed for Cody's protection, like I always do anytime there's a death or an accident in a dream, just to cover all bases. But I did feel that it was symbolic. And so I didn't know if it was for me, if it was for him, and so I sent him in the dream, and we had several interesting thoughts about it. One was Caden. Why was he in the dream? I discovered that he is 9 years old, and so one of his friends had mentioned that maybe the inheritance, or the generation that's watching this thing unfold, came to mind. Well, anyway, so I just was pondering and praying, and one night, in the middle of the night, God woke me up, and he said, the dream literally means, I wrote it down, a generation is watching the dying of presence over intellectual head knowledge. And come to find out, biblical numbers biblically have different meanings. And the meaning of the word, or the number 9, which is the age of Caden, means fruit. And his name literally means fighter. And it just fell into place that Leah, the scholar, the professor of religion, so to speak, was emphasizing how important knowledge is. Cody, the non-professional youth pastor, typical persona of that, represented the presence. And the argument was, which is more important? And the thing is that knowledge minus the presence, number 1, puffs up, but number 2, it's eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's the whole problem with knowledge. You have to have the presence with the knowledge, because remember, Jesus said, my words I speak to you are spirit and life. You have to have the presence anointing the words, or it simply is from the wrong tree. And there is a generation that is watching the dying of presence. In America, we're so concerned with the head, with being Grecian-minded. The Greeks valued the mind above anything else, and the thought process, and the philosophers were held in high esteem. All of that stuff we're seeing, especially in the Western Hemisphere, in Europe and in America, this elevation of scholarly knowledge, and it's caused problems. And I felt that this dream was a sign that I was supposed to say something, because if you research Rob Bell, he's being called a Christian philosopher, and his book is based on reasoning. How can a God who is love send billions of people to hell because of a few acts that they did in their life? That the finite years of their life, how can that equal eternity in a place of torment? That's his reasoning, and we'll address some of that as well. But one thing that we have to understand is that our battle is not against Rob Bell. Our battle is against doctrine that has infiltrated the church, that is leading Christians astray, and that's preventing people from entering the kingdom. And what really shocked me is one night I came home and my husband had watched Bill O'Reilly, and he said, "Hey, there's this Christian philosopher on Bill O'Reilly that said there's no hell." And Bill was, saying, "Oh, well, since there's no hell, I can do whatever I want because there's no penalty." And this philosopher said, "Well, no, you need to live right." And he's like, "No, I don't, because there's no hell." And he was asked if he believed there was a heaven, and this philosopher said, "Yeah, there's a heaven." And Bill O'Reilly said, "Well, tell Adolf hi when you get there." And the point obviously being that if there's no hell, then there is no punishment for wickedness. Therefore, we can cast off restraint. There's no reason to live a life of righteousness. And I was like, goodness, a Christian philosopher that doesn't believe in hell? I mean, that's kind of interesting, and I didn't know who it was. Then 2 nights later, Bill O'Reilly, being the fair and balanced, no spin guy that he claims to be, had Franklin Graham on. And he brought up this Christian philosopher, and on the screen is this book, Love Wins. And I was like, "Mike, was that philosopher dude, was he Rob Bell?" And he said, "Yeah." And I was like, wow, I didn't know that. And so Franklin Graham basically said that his teachings are false and that he's a heretic. And for people that believe in, compromise and being politically correct, and that love wouldn't say that. Well, if you read the Bible, it's very clear that the leaders of the New Testament church had no problem calling people false teachers, false prophets, if that was the case. And so I was like, oh my goodness, so I decided, what, I'm going to get the book and I'm going to read it for a couple reasons. Number one, does he really believe this? And number two, that way if people say, well, have you read the book? I can say, yes, I have. So I read the first chapter, and I took some notes because that's how I am. I'm definitely a note taker. I like to organize my thoughts. And this is one of the things from his book. This is basically the premise, the thesis of his discussion is, if all the billions of people who have ever lived, will only a select number make it to a better place, and every other single person suffer in torment and punishment forever. Is this acceptable to God? Has God created millions of people over tens of thousands of years who are going to spend eternity in anguish? Can God do this or even allow this and still claim to be a loving God? So this is straight out of his book. So this is his question. And it was based on something about how Gandhi was a good man, and then someone had put a note, there were 2 baddies in hell. I find that disturbing that someone would write that, because we don't know for sure if he's in hell or not. Did he accept Jesus Christ as his Savior before? We don't know. It's kind of interesting to make that harsh judgment. So I understand where he's coming from. Like, do we really know? And would God really do that? A man that lived such a good life and helped so many people, would God send him to hell? And so that started these series of thoughts and questions that culminated in this book.